Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen and enjoy my stories every day. In the heart of a bustling city, where the skyline was a jagged line of ambitions, my wife Abigail was making her way up the corporate ladder at a breakneck pace. It was a time of celebration, or so I thought. When Abigail shared news of her unexpected promotion over dinner, her eyes sparkled with a mix of excitement and something unplaceable, perhaps nervousness. I toasted to her success, filled with pride and love, utterly oblivious to the brewing storm. As the weeks passed, Abigail's late nights at the office became the norm. She was always glued to her phone, smiling at text messages I assumed were from her team. "It's all for us," she would say, kissing me goodbye each morning. I believed her, foolishly ignoring the nagging doubts that began to whisper in the back of my mind. Then, one chilly evening, I called her office to surprise her with a dinner plan. The phone rang longer than usual before it was abruptly picked up. "Hello," I greeted, ready to hear her voice. But it wasn't Abigail who answered. The voice was masculine, coarse, and dripping with disdain. "She's busy," he barked, before I could even introduce myself. "Pardon me, but may I speak with my wife, Abigail?" I asked, my voice steady despite the spike of adrenaline. "She's no longer your woman," he spat out, and the line went dead, leaving a ringing silence that echoed through my being. My heart pounded against my ribs like a prisoner demanding release, and a cold dread settled in my stomach. I drove to her office, my mind racing with every possible scenario except the truth. The office was dimly lit, mostly empty, but Abigail's office light was a beacon of betrayal. Through the frosted glass, I saw them, Abigail and her boss, laughing together with an intimacy that shattered my world. The confrontation was a blur of shouted accusations and tearful denials. Abigail's confession came out amidst sobs. She had been seeing him for months. Her promotion, the late nights, the secretive texts, it was all a facade for their affair. Betrayal turned my love into fury. I was supposed to be her partner, her confidant, not the fool left in the dark. The man who had shared my bed with Abigail was now mocking me through phone calls and sneers across the office floor. Something inside me snapped. If she had chosen to ruin our vows for a fling with her boss, then I'd make sure the cost was high. My plan was simple yet ruthless: expose their affair to the company, ensure her boss's influential friends heard of his indiscretions, and drag their reputations through the mud as they had dragged my heart. I gathered evidence of their affair: emails, texts, photos from office parties where their closeness was inappropriate. With each piece of proof, my resolve hardened. I was no longer the loving husband, I was the avenger of my own heartbreak. The fallout was nuclear. Careers tarnished, relationships severed. Abigail pleaded for forgiveness, but the woman I had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger with my wife's face. In the end, I watched as Abigail moved out of our home, her eyes hollow, her spirit broken. We signed the divorce papers in silence, the finality of the act a heavy stone in my chest. As she walked away, a part of me wanted to call out, to rewind time and find a moment before deceit had crept in. But it was too late for what-ifs. The office building where she once worked became just another part of the skyline, a shadow in my peripheral vision as I started anew, far from the city of broken promises. The intrigue of how far the ripples of their betrayal spread was a tale for another time, but for me, it was the end. Or so I believed. The aftermath of Abigail's departure left my life in a chaotic spiral. As I stood alone in the once shared spaces of our home, the silence was deafening. I could still hear the echo of our last conversation, the final goodbye that felt more like a sharp intake of breath before diving into icy waters. My next steps were clear: if I couldn't salvage our marriage, would ensure justice through exposure. I began my day with a single goal in mind. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed the number of the most influential gossip columnist known for her work in a major city tabloid. When she answered, her voice was smooth, almost inviting. "Good morning, this is Thomas," I introduced myself. "I have a story for you, one that involves high-level corporate intrigue and a personal betrayal that I think your readers will find quite compelling." Her interest piqued instantly. "I'm listening," she said, a note of curiosity in her voice. I laid out the details methodically: Abigail's affair with her boss, the promotion, the phone call that revealed it all. As I spoke, the initial pain gave way to a cold resolve. I provided her with the emails and texts, each piece more damning than the last. "Thomas, this is explosive," she exclaimed after a brief pause, her tone mixed with professional excitement and a hint of sympathy. "We'll need to verify everything, but if this checks out, it's front-page material." Encouraged by her response, I spent the rest of the morning making more calls, this time to her boss's competitors. Each call was a calculated move, painting her boss as a man who mixed business with pleasure to a detrimental degree. By afternoon, my focus shifted to a more personal form of confrontation. I drove to the company where they both worked, a plan forming with every mile that passed. Security at the building recognized me, their expressions a mixture of pity and discomfort. I nodded curtly, my facade of calm barely concealing the storm inside. Inside, the murmurs began as soon as I stepped off the elevator. I walked directly to her boss's office. The door was ajar, and he was there, looking as arrogant as ever. He looked up, surprise registering on his face only momentarily before his usual smugness returned. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You've done enough," I retorted, stepping closer. "But I thought you should know, the whole city will soon learn about your little office escapades. How long do you think the board will keep you once the shareholders find out?" His face paled, the confident demeanor slipping. "You wouldn't dare," he hissed. "I already have. And there's nothing you can do about it," I declared with finality, turning on my heel and leaving his office before he could respond. As I left the building, the weight of my actions began to sink in. I had ignited a firestorm that would consume everything Abigail and her boss had worked for. It was retribution, yes, but the hollowness of victory gnawed at me. Had I gone too far? Or was this just the beginning of their deserved downfall? The whispers of colleagues and the flash of cameras outside the office complex confirmed that the story had already hit the news. The consequences of their actions were just starting to unfold, and I was the architect of their undoing. As I drove away, the skyline looked different, less like a bastion of dreams and more like a chessboard where I had just made a decisive move. Yet, the game was far from over. There were more moves to make, more secrets to uncover. The intrigue of their betrayal would unravel further, and I was ready to see it through to the bitter end. The morning after the news broke was eerily quiet. As the city awoke to headlines screaming of corporate scandal and personal betrayals, I sat in the dim light of my kitchen, the newspaper spread out before me. The front-page article displayed pictures of Abigail and her boss caught in a candid moment, their secret laid bare for all to see. My phone buzzed incessantly, a mix of calls from unknown numbers and messages from old friends who had pieced together my involvement. As I sipped my coffee, my resolve hardened. The initial wave of scandal was just the beginning. Today, I planned to ensure that every aspect of their lives felt the impact of their choices. My first stop was the corporate office where I once had dreams of celebrating Abigail's promotions, not her downfall. As I approached, I noticed a small crowd of reporters clustered near the entrance, their cameras pointed towards anyone who looked remotely important. I adjusted my coat and stepped forward, ready to fuel the fire of inquiry. "Mr. Thompson," a reporter recognized me, her eyes widening with anticipation. "Do you have a moment?" I nodded, stepping into the view of the cameras. "I believe the public deserves to know the kind of leadership that runs this corporation," I began, my voice steady. "Not just the business decisions, but the personal integrity of those at the top." The questions flew fast, each one a sharp jab at the facade that Abigail and her boss had maintained for so long. I answered each with a calm precision, detailing the deceit without flinching. The reporters lapped up every word, their recorders capturing this raw slice of corporate drama. Leaving the swarm of media behind, I headed to my next target, the company's major investors. I had scheduled meetings under the guise of discussing potential market impacts, but my real plan was to sow seeds of doubt about the stability of the company's leadership. In a high-rise building overlooking the city, I met with the first group, laying out the sordid details alongside suggestions of impending lawsuits and stock dips. "Are you suggesting we pull out?" one investor asked, his expression a mix of concern and intrigue. "I'm suggesting you consider all factors, including the trustworthiness of those leading your investments," I replied, leaving them with folders full of incriminating emails and suggestive photos. By afternoon, the effects of my morning's work were visible. Stock prices began to wobble, whispers turned into debates, and the board of directors called an emergency meeting. I received a call from a board member, an old acquaintance who was bewildered by the day's events. "Thomas, this is chaos. Are you sure there's no other way to handle this?" he pleaded over the phone. "Frank, when trust is broken so fundamentally, transparency is the only way forward," I answered, feeling a twinge of satisfaction as I hung up. Later, as the sun began to set, I stood outside the office building, watching employees leave with faces drawn tight with stress. Among them was Abigail, her usual poised demeanor crumbled. She spotted me, her steps faltering. "Thomas, please," she approached, her voice low and pleading. "You've made your point. Can we just talk about this?" "There's nothing left to discuss, Abigail," I said coldly, the hurt resurfacing despite my vengeful triumph. "You made your choices." She reached out, tears glistening in her eyes, but I stepped back, the finality of the gesture clear. "Goodbye, Abigail." As I walked away, the chilly breeze felt like whispers of victory mixed with whispers of loss. The city lights flickered as if reflecting the tumult of my emotions, vindicated, yet hollow. The battle might have been won, but the war on the betrayal that had upended my life was far from over. There were more revelations to come, more consequences to be faced. For both of us. The fallout from the scandal had spiraled beyond my expectations. The board meeting convened under pressure, and whispers of potential layoffs echoed through the hallways. I reveled in the chaos I had orchestrated, each piece of news reinforcing my sense of vindication. But beneath it all, a gnawing emptiness lingered. The love I had for Abigail had been poisoned by betrayal, and it gnawed at my gut like a slow, persistent ache. As the days passed, the media frenzy intensified. Abigail's boss, now a shadow of his former self, issued a public apology, but it did little to quell the storm. My eyes flickered with a mix of anger and satisfaction as I watched their world crumble. But I knew that the true blow had yet to land. I had saved the best for last. One evening, while poring over the myriad of emails and documents I had collected, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold, a final, damning piece of evidence. Hidden within Abigail's correspondence was a thread discussing not just their affair but a plan to undermine me at work. She had been in league with her boss to push me out of the very company I had worked tirelessly to build. The betrayal had deeper roots than I had imagined, and it ignited a fire within me. The next day, I set my plan into motion. I contacted a few trusted contacts within the company and strategically leaked the information to select employees. Word spread quickly, and I watched as rumors about Abigail's intentions and manipulations festered within the walls of the corporation. By the time I arrived at the office, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The staff was abuzz with whispers, their loyalty fractured. I strolled through the hallways, a calculated smile on my face, knowing I was the puppet master pulling the strings of their downfall. As I reached Abigail's office, I paused at the door, gathering my thoughts. I pushed the door open, and she looked up, her expression one of surprise that quickly morphed into anger. "Thomas. What do you want?" she snapped, her voice laced with desperation. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. "I want to show you something," I replied, my tone cold as ice. I handed her a folder filled with the evidence of her treachery, each document a sharp reminder of her duplicity. You wouldn't dare, she hissed, flipping through the papers, her face paling. But I already have, I replied, relishing her panic. You thought you could destroy my career, my life, without consequences. You miscalculated. Her eyes darted around the room, fear rising within them. This isn't how it has to end, Thomas. We can fix this. We can be happy again. Happy? I scoffed, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. You destroyed that chance the moment you decided to lie and betray me. You chose him over us. Before she could respond, her boss barged in, his face contorted with rage. What's going on here? He demanded, glancing between us. The tension was palpable, the air thick with unspoken accusations. I was just about to explain to Abigail how her deceit will cost her everything, I said, my voice low and menacing. You have no idea what you're getting into, he sneered, trying to assert his authority. No, I think I do, I shot back. You both thought you could conspire against me without any repercussions. But I'm not going to sit idly by while you ruin my life. In a sudden rush of adrenaline, I slammed the folder onto the desk, papers scattering across the surface. Your empire is crumbling, and I'm just getting started, I said, my voice rising. The fight had ignited a primal rage within me. It was time to deliver the final blow. With a swift motion, I stepped toward the door, pushing past the boss. This isn't over, I warned, leaving them in stunned silence. I stormed out, adrenaline pumping through my veins, the weight of revenge heavy on my shoulders. The final act was in motion. I would expose their treachery to the world. In the following days, I gathered every piece of evidence, and when I was ready, I released it to the press. The article that followed was a bombshell, detailing the conspiracy between Abigail and her boss to undermine me, complete with evidence and witness statements. The company was in shambles, and the fallout was swift and brutal. As the news spread, Abigail's world collapsed. She became a pariah in her social circles, the whispers of betrayal echoing through every conversation. I watched from the sidelines, knowing I had delivered the ultimate retribution. Months later, I received a text from Abigail. I never meant for it to go this far. Can we talk? I stared at the screen, anger and satisfaction battling within me. There would be no more conversations, no more apologies. Goodbye, Abigail, I typed back, pressing send with finality. As I looked out at the city skyline, I realized I had reclaimed my power, my dignity. I was free from the shackles of betrayal, ready to forge a new path, leaving behind the wreckage of our love. The echoes of our history faded into the distance, a bitter reminder of what was lost, and what I would never allow to happen again.